Thank you to the Crown for having us. Thank you to all of you for being here on a Thursday night. I think it's Thursday. Okay. And thank you to Jacob for by sitting in the corner and playing guitar while I talk. It's all a scam. Okay. And I apologize that I don't have this memorized, so I'm going to look down quite a lot. This is very important to me, though, so please remember what you hear today. Okay, so yesterday it was reported that Jordan Peele wanted to remake the Disney cartoon Gargoyles. It was about, who knows Gargoyles here? Okay, you guys are of age. Great. Okay. It was about a time-displaced gargoyle warriors adapting to modern life in New York. Ninja Turtles, but with wings. According to the report, Jordan Peele walked into Disney's offices with all his recent box office clout from Get Out and whatnot, and demanded the chance to reboot the somewhat beloved cartoon show about flying monsters. Disney didn't say yes or no, but the likelihood of this adaptation remains super unlikely. Disney still has scars from the last time someone tried to adapt Gargoyles. That was back in 1998. And that director was Werner Herzog. This is the story of that catastrophic partnership. And I'm not going to do Herzog's voice, so I apologize. This is a quote from him. "There are thousands of gargoyles in Munich. When I was a boy, walking with my mother to the market, one dislodged and fell hundreds of feet from a cathedral. It almost killed me. It caused quite the stir. Many gargoyles were removed after that day. And so when I saw these animated creatures exploding from stone to flesh, the memory of that day came back to me, and I knew I had to make this film." According to sources, Jordan Peele was a fan of Herzog's take on the film, or at least the bits he's managed to piece together over the years. The film was obviously never released, or we all would have seen it. It was briefly uploaded to pieces in YouTube, following Herzog's sort of rise in profile in the mid-2000s as a nihilistic, curmudgeonly goofball. But it was removed, and that was the last bit of Herzog's Gargoyles. The last bit of Herzog's Gargoyles available on the internet was the teaser trailer, which was removed in 2011. Okay, so does everyone know who all of these gargoyles are? Goliath. Yeah. Who's that one though? Brooklyn. Oh yeah. Chelsea knows. Okay. Yeah. I'll just. You want to?
Lexington.
Oh yeah. And then I'll do the rest. So that's Demona. She's like a bad girl. Down there is Broadway. He's the lovable fat oaf. That's Hudson, played by Ed Asner. He's old. That's Bronx in my shadow. He's a dog. He's a gargoyle dog. And then that's Elisa Mazza down in the corner. She's a human. Gargoyles was never a commercial success, but its audience was fiercely loyal, as you can tell by Chelsea. It was unlike anything else on children's television at the time, with the possible exception of Batman the Animated Series, which skewed more towards mood and noir, using characters that were already, we all knew Batman, we knew Robin, you know. But Gargoyles was a sword and sorcery, fish out of water story about the human condition. Gargoyles was about spectacle. It treated the audience, primarily children, as adults, with sophisticated storytelling, multi-episode arcs, adult themes, nothing gross, but adult themes. It was known for the complexity of its characters, be they gargoyles, humans, Children of Oberon, New Olympians. Again, despite the love and care and the connection it had with its audience, it was a fringe success at best. The ratings steadily declined each season, but like as I said, it had its fans, including me and Chelsea and probably some of you, and two others named Hannah and Simon, who happened to be Werner Herzog's children. This was a show Herzog referred to as emotional ballast that allowed him to better connect with them. Herzog saw just enough to get the basics. The Gargoyles were warriors from the 10th century who slept for centuries only to awaken in the 1990s of all times. They were encased by stone during the day and became flesh only after the sun went down. While Hannah and Simon and myself thought the Gargoyles were heroes, Werner saw it very differently. Walking is the last honest thing to do in the world, and yet they have wings. They fly. They're not birds, but they fly. I would uncover the dishonesty in the noble, selfless veneer. That was a stupid veneer, a very middle-class veneer. Why should a gargoyle protect a human? This is the master-slave dialectic. This is why the caged bird sings. Beneath the paving stones, the gargoyle. He began writing notes. Despite the fact he knew none of the characters' names and only had a vague idea of their personalities. For Herzog, the visuals and the themes were enough. Quote, I liked the way they screamed when they woke up each night. I liked the way the stone exploded from their bodies. It was orgasmic. It was the sound of overwhelming fornication, but it was not obscene. Herzog quickly became enamored with the social contract between these benevolent yet monstrous guardians and the humans they protected. But he obstinately refused to actually watch an episode. Still, he became familiar with the show's mythology, which borrowed heavily from Arthurian legends, Shakespeare, Irish folklore, Aboriginal dreamtime, all that good stuff. The opening for the show, as you guys probably know, declares 1,000 years ago, superstition and the sword ruled. Herzog was determined to convince modern audiences that superstition and the sword still ruled, maybe even more so, and that to think otherwise was sentimental dribble. The one thing that was clear from the beginning was that the Gargoyles deserved better. If I were born a gargoyle, would I feel it my duty to protect humanity? No. The humans spit on the gargoyles. They flee from them. Perhaps they are right, but from a gargoyle's perspective, humans are disease. And if I were a gargoyle, I would try to eradicate the disease. I would consider that my duty. That is the movie. There will be no lasers or magic spells, just making a new order in a world built on chaos and bones, red tooth and claws, virgins with wings. Herzog had a vision. With his most recent films titled Scream of Stone, Lessons of Darkness, and Wings of Hope, it may be that the Gargoyles had long percolated inside his brain. Just as Jordan Peele would 20 years later, he pitched his idea to the owners of the Gargoyles trademark, Walt Disney. Werner Herzog and Disney were obviously an odd match, but more so in the 90s. His longtime collaborator, Klaus Kinski, had just died in 1991, and Werner's cachet was sort of lowering in Europe, and he wasn't quite like the funny guy we know him today in America as a nihilistic goofball. He was a man in hideous limbo, and he needed to try something else. So, Disney, too, existed in an odd purgatory. Their animated features like Lion King and Aladdin all going very well, right? But in the 90s, you have to remember the kind of live-action films that Disney was putting out to understand why they would take a chance on a relatively obscure, for Americans in the 90s, German director who could be charitably described as a fucking lunatic. Some of those 90s Disney films were Shipwrecked, Flubber, and That Darn Cat, and Meet the Deedles. All critical flops. So there was a civil war being fought behind the scenes, as much generational as ideological. The faction that didn't want to keep remaking Flubber over and over again was headed by three relatively young executives, Colin McGowan, Damon Agnos, and David Roth. They were known around the Disney lot as the Three Musketeers. They gave themselves this name. The strategy was to milk Herzog for his international gravitas and give him a blank check to make a movie about flying monsters. Incidentally, Blank Check was also a Disney movie in the 90s, and that one was quite good. Still, there were several compromises made by both sides to make this agreement work. So the original screenwriter was just some Disney underling, and he got fired rather quickly. Herzog tried to write the script himself, but he steadfastly refused to write dialogue for the Gargoyles because, and I quote, "The Gargoyles are monsters, so even if they could speak, we wouldn't understand them." So the studio and director compromised by hiring an established name to punch up the screenplay. That name was R.L. Stine. R.L. Stine was, of course, the author of the wildly popular Goosebumps series, which is everyone here must know, but sort of a cliffhanger-centric YA children's book horror sort of thing. This would be Stine's first attempt at a screenplay. When he delivered his first draft, Herzog burnt it and then took a Polaroid of the ashes and sent it back to Stine saying, "Now the script is good." Needless to say, that was the high point of the collaboration. Stine, after many years, was asked about his experience with Herzog and Gargoyles, and answered by making a gun out of his fingers and pointing it at his crotch and firing once, twice, thrice. He's a grimy little pimp, Herzog said of his writing partner, claiming that when he asked Stine what the R and the L stood for, he became flustered, and then will they, won't they dynamic. Herzog's film explicitly favors the will they theory. This was to be the first R-rated Disney film, and there would be gargoyle fucking. That was crucial. The lack of gargoyle sex in the cartoon had always struck Herzog as a confounding choice, and he meant to make things right. Rounding out the cast were Madeline Stowe as Demona, ex-lover of Goliath, Freddie Prinze Jr. as Brooklyn, Jonathan Taylor Thomas as Lexington, the dog from Beethoven II as Bronx, the gargoyle dog, Gary Oldman as the villain David Xanatos, and Tommy Lee Jones as the Giggler, a new character created by Herzog who would act as the film's conscience. Shooting began in Scotland, in a castle from the 13th century, which angered Herzog because the gargoyles came from the 10th century. The problem started immediately. According to Herzog, we began to go mad all at once. Disney refused Herzog's demand that the gargoyles be able to dispense with their loincloths, arguing that while it makes perfect sense that their bodies would turn to stone during the day, it made no sense at all that their garments would also turn to stone. Does that make sense? I don't think so. According to David Roth, Disney's main man on the ground, Herzog wanted the gargoyle parts flapping around in the wind. I understood his point about the stone and everything, but this is Disney. We couldn't have that, end quote. Freddie Prinze Jr. was a problem, obviously. He had a new prostitute in his trailer every night. Nobody understood the giggler or his purpose in the film. The baboons that Herzog ordered escaped and wreaked havoc on a Scottish village. Gary Oldman habitually tortured extras, taunting them about subjects as varied as their little Scottish faces or Scotland's overrated education system. This led to an altercation between Herzog and Oldman. which ended up with Herzog brandishing a machete and firing Oldman on the spot, even though Gary Oldman refused to actually vacate the premises and just stayed, even though he was eventually replaced, his character was replaced by Johnny Depp, who according to Herzog was a true ridiculous dumbass. Nobody understood the giggler. A trailer for the film was prematurely leaked and universally panned, which only seemed to encourage the director. Good, let them tilt at their windmills, he said. A local reporter, unaware of the source material, visited the set to see the crew setting up a shot of what appeared to be a Caligula-like Gargoyles orgy. When asked how he could justify this, Herzog replied, "What would an ocean be without a monster lurking in the dark? It would be like sleep without dreams." And that was the high point of the project. The film went over budget by $75 million. The giggler's role increased to the point where he was the focus. He became the narrator, and his narration often was just giggles. Many gargoyles were written out of the script. In fact, nobody seemed to notice that Broadway, the lovable fat oaf gargoyle, was never in it in the first place. Which is a shame, because he's a good gargoyle. The conservative and less conservative Disney execs, Roth, Agnos, and McGowan, including them, they all turned on the project, all of them. The original cut of the film was like 4.5 hours. Herzog refused to cut it down anymore because he said the giggler would not approve of these edits. Eventually he relented and he turned in a 2-hour, 45-minute cut by completely erasing the part of Lexington. And the actor who played Lexington, Jonathan Taylor Thomas, soon developed a drinking problem, which is why you haven't seen him in 20 years. It's fucked up. Herzog said of his actors, they were like crows who thought they were ravens. Except for Rosie Perez, he would later say. He really liked her. Anyway, the studio pulled the plug, obviously. And audiences never got their live-action gargoyle movie. Herzog, for his part, was fine with this. He immediately started his next documentary, which is about the subculture of people who fall in love with spiders. In fact, many think he was just messing around with Disney the entire time, as sort of a proto-troll thing, before it became popular. Since then, the legend has exponentially grown. Little snippets of footage, or quotes, or weird little, hearsay even. It all contributes to, the mythology of Herzog's unfinished Gargoyles film. According to Derrida, this was the very moment when art was circumcised. And personally, obviously I like the Gargoyles, and Herzog's good too. But I've always had an outsized appreciation for unfinished projects. There's something beautiful about incompleteness. Something glorious about failure. Success ought not to be measured in Oscars or box office records. Herzog made the film he wanted to make. It's probably not the one any of us wanted to see. It's definitely not the one Disney wanted to see. But he made it. And that's the sort of courage lacking in the world right now. Yes, the likelihood is that Herzog's Gargoyle film is fucking terrible. It was a fucking mess, probably. But he made it. And we deserve to see it. We deserve to see gargoyles fly, or glide, whatever. David Roth, one of Herzog's closest allies at Disney at the time, said of the film, It was the worst thing I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of bad things. I've seen the light go out of a friend's eyes. I've seen a man decapitated when he drove his car into a big old tree. I've seen my children's faces when I told them my wife and I were getting a divorce. I'd rather see all of that again than watch this movie. To call it garbage would be an insult to garbage. Garbage is at least honest about what it is. It doesn't pretend to be art. It doesn't insist upon itself or dishonor itself. It doesn't make me physically ill. This film made me ill. I wanted to vomit every minute I was watching it. He made a film that would have set Western civilization back 100 years. I still have nightmares about the scene in the bubble bath. I've made it my mission to destroy the footage, to keep it from spreading to even one more person. Simply put, this movie was a crime against humanity. And years later, Herzog was asked to respond to Roth's infamous tirade. His response was, "I don't know who that person is."